Grace Bashlow, the only daughter of billionaire William Bashlow, had everything money could buy. Custom gowns hand-tailored in Paris, penthouse suites overlooking the Manhattan skyline, and a surname that commanded reverence in every boardroom from Wall Street to London. Yet there was one thing billions had never been able to purchase: genuine love. At 26, Grace made a decision that stunned her parents and sent quiet shockwaves through New York's elite circles. She walked away from the Bashlow empire, left the glittering prison of Manhattan behind, and moved to Toronto under a completely different name. There, in an unassuming neighborhood of brick townhouses and quiet trees, she built a modest life, introducing herself to everyone she met as Grace Miller, the daughter of a struggling, hard-working single mother. Grace harbored a deep, simple belief. If a man fell in love with her when she had nothing to offer but her heart, if he chose her before discovering who she really was, then that love would be honest, it would be pure, and it would last forever. She could not have been more wrong. The day Ryan Collins divorced his wife, he walked out of the downtown courthouse with a light step, straightening his tie, convinced he had just made the best decision of his life. He felt free. He felt victorious. 3 days later, something happened outside the tiny third-floor apartment where Grace lived. Something that left Ryan standing on the rain-slicked pavement, frozen in utter disbelief. By then, the quiet, devoted woman he had thrown away was already slipping far beyond his reach. And Ryan was about to discover that the greatest mistake of his life was one that could never, ever be undone. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional stories about love, betrayal, family secrets, and unforgettable second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let us continue Grace's incredible story. To understand the depth of Grace's choice, you have to picture the world she walked away from. The Bashlow residence in Manhattan was not merely a house. It was a museum of marble, glass, and hushed grandeur. William Bashlow had built an empire from shipping, real estate, and global tech investments. He was a man whose call was taken by heads of state, a father who adored his only daughter so fiercely he would have moved heaven and earth to shield her from pain. Her mother, Eleanor, was the picture of old-world poise, a woman who moved through charity galas and high-society luncheons with effortless grace. They loved Grace deeply. There was no cruelty in the Bashlow home, no cold neglect. But there was an undeniable, suffocating air of arrangement. From the time Grace was old enough to understand the weight of her last name, every relationship in her life carried an asterisk. In prep school, girls befriended her because their mothers wanted invitations to the Bashlow summer estate in the Hamptons. In university, young men asked her out with practiced, polite smiles, their eyes widening just a fraction too much when her family's private driver pulled up to the curb. Grace remembered one evening in particular, during her senior year at Columbia. She had been dating a charming young banker named Julian for 6 months. She had truly believed he cared for her laugh, her love of vintage books, her quiet habit of painting watercolors by the window late at night. Then came the night of her father's annual autumn gala. Grace had been standing near the conservatory doors, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, searching for Julian in the crowd. She caught sight of him standing near a column with 2 older executives, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. One of the executives leaned in with a conspiratorial chuckle and said, "She is a sweet girl, Julian." Smart move. Securing a seat at William Bashlow's table before 30? You are set for life. Julian had not defended her. He had not said, "I love her for who she is." He had simply smiled, taken a sip of his drink, and murmured, "Let us just say the return on investment on this relationship is higher than anything on Wall Street." Grace had backed away quietly into the shadows, the icy sensation in her chest sharp enough to steal her breath. She did not make a scene. She placed the glasses on a silver tray, walked upstairs to her childhood bedroom, and sat on the edge of her 4-poster bed until the music below faded into silence. That was the night the seed was planted. Money buys comfort, darling. Her mother Eleanor had told her late one evening, sitting beside Grace in the dimly lit library, gently stroking her daughter's dark hair. It buys safety, but it makes the heart a very complicated place for outsiders to navigate. "I do not want a complicated heart, Mom," Grace had whispered, her throat tight. I just want someone to look at me and see me. Not the fortune, not Dad's company, just Grace. By her 26th birthday, Grace had reached her breaking point. She looked at the polished, predictable road stretching out before her. A social registry marriage, a lifetime of wondering if the man lying beside her saw her as a partner or a portfolio, and she knew she could not walk it. It took weeks of painful conversations to convince her parents. William Bashlow had raged at first, not out of anger, but out of fear for his daughter's safety. You want to live in a studio apartment? Work a middle management job? Grace, the world outside this house is not a fairy tale. It is harsh. I know it is harsh, Dad, Grace had answered, holding her father's large, calloused hands in her own. But I need to know if I can stand on my own feet. I need to know if someone can love me when there is nothing to gain from it. Eleanor had wept quietly, but in the end, seeing the quiet resolve in her daughter's dark eyes, she had kissed Grace's cheek and given her blessing. Grace left New York with 2 suitcases, a humble laptop, and enough savings from her own modest salary at an arts nonprofit to cover 6 months of rent. She relinquished her trust fund access, left her luxury vehicle in the garage, and packed away her designer wardrobe. She moved to Toronto, secured a cozy, older third-floor apartment in a neighborhood lined with maple trees, and took a job as a mid-level content editor at a modest publishing house downtown. To the world in Toronto, she was Grace Miller. Her father had passed away years ago, she told people gently when asked, and her mother was a retired seamstress living quietly in upstate New York. For 2 years, Grace lived a simple, grounded life. She rode the streetcar to work. She bought groceries at the corner market, chatting with the elderly Italian vendor about the best tomatoes for sauce. She painted by her window as rain rattled against the glass. For the first time in her life, she felt real. And then, on a brisk Tuesday morning in late October, she walked into a small coffee shop near her office and met Ryan Collins. Ryan was handsome in a grounded, working-class way that immediately drew Grace's eye. He was 30, an up-and-coming architect at a mid-sized firm, with broad shoulders, dark hair that always looked slightly wind-muffled, and a warm, crooked smile that seemed to light up his entire face. Their first meeting was an accident of circumstance. Grace had spilled a file folder full of manuscript pages near the condiment bar, and Ryan had immediately dropped to his knees to help her gather them. Unpublished novel? Ryan had asked, handing her a stack of papers, his hazel eyes meeting hers with bright curiosity. A historical biography, actually, Grace had replied, taking the pages, her fingers brushing against his. A small spark passed between them, warm, unexpected, and utterly grounded. Not quite a bestseller yet. Well, if the writing is half as captivating as the editor, I am sure it will be a hit, Ryan had said, giving her that crooked smile. It was a simple compliment, but coming from him, without a trace of slick New York pretense, it sent a flutter through Grace's chest. They sat down together that morning over simple drip coffees. Ryan told her about his work, his dream of designing affordable, beautiful community spaces rather than stark, cold skyscrapers. He talked with passion, his hands gesturing actively as he described the way natural light could transform an ordinary room. Grace listened, mesmerized. When he asked about her, she told him her crafted story. Grace Miller, daughter of a seamstress, editing manuscripts by day, dreaming of a quiet life by night. Ryan did not ask about luxury. He did not care about elite circles. He held her hand across the wooden table, looked into her eyes, and said, "It sounds like a lovely life, Grace." Their courtship moved with the gentle grace of a changing season. They walked through High Park in the autumn, leaves crunching beneath their boots, sharing cheap bags of roasted chestnuts. Ryan would cook simple pasta dishes in Grace's tiny apartment, complaining playfully about her squeaky kitchen floorboards before pulling her into a slow dance in the narrow hallway. When Grace caught a severe flu during her first winter with Ryan, he did not send expensive flowers from an assistant-ordered boutique. He came over after a 10-hour workday, brought homemade chicken broth in a scratched thermos, tucked her into bed, and sat on the floor beside her, holding her hand until she drifted off to sleep. Looking at him in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Grace felt a profound tear rise in her eyes. This is it, she thought, her heart swelling with a gratitude deeper than any wealth could ever buy. He loves Grace Miller. He loves the girl in the modest apartment with the squeaky floors. 8 months after they met, on a cold, starlit evening overlooking the lake, Ryan knelt in the snow and pulled a modest, single solitaire ring from his coat pocket. "Grace," Ryan had whispered, his hands trembling slightly, his breath misting in the cold night air. "I do not have a fortune to give you. I am just a guy trying to build a life. But I promise you, if you marry me, I will protect you. I will work every day to make you happy, and I will love you until my very last breath." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks, warm against her cold skin. She did not care about the size of the diamond. She did not care that the ring had cost him 2 months of his modest salary. "Yes," she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, Ryan. 1,000 times yes." They were married 4 months later in a small, quiet civil ceremony. Eleanor Bashlow had traveled secretly to Toronto, watching her daughter say her vows from the back row of the tiny chapel, tears of quiet pride streaming down her face. Eleanor had met Ryan briefly before the wedding, presented as Grace's quiet aunt, and Ryan had greeted the elegant older woman with warm, respectful politeness, completely unaware that he was speaking to the matriarch of one of the richest families in North America. For the first 2 years of their marriage, Grace believed she had found her heaven on earth. They moved into a cozy, 2-bedroom apartment. Grace kept working at the publishing house, quietly managing her salary, contributing equally to their household bills. Ryan's career was growing, though progress was slow. When Ryan came home exhausted from tough client meetings, Grace was there to massage his shoulders, to listen to his frustrations, to offer gentle, wise counsel that subtly drew from the deep business acumen she had absorbed watching her father for decades. Ryan often marveled at how sharp her intuition was, laughingly calling her his secret weapon. "You should have been a chief executive officer, Grace," he would say, kissing her forehead as they lay in bed. "I am happy right here," Grace would reply softly, curling into his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "With you, it was a perfect life. A simple life, until the subtle shifts began. Ambition is a quiet poison when left untethered from gratitude." As Ryan entered his 3rd year at the architecture firm, his firm was acquired by a larger, more prestigious firm, Vanderbilt and Associates. Suddenly, Ryan was thrust into a world of corporate dinners, high-stakes client pitches, and colleagues who spoke fluent luxury. Grace watched the shift happen slowly, like a slow frost settling over a garden. Ryan started paying more attention to labels. He bought expensive suits on credit, arguing that he needed to look the part for wealthier clients. He began making subtle, careless remarks about their apartment, complaining about the size of their kitchen or the age of their car when his colleagues drove foreign sports cars into the parkade. "Grace, did you see the watch Harrison was wearing today?" Ryan said one evening, untying his tie as he walked into the kitchen, tossing his briefcase onto the counter. "It is a Patek Philippe, costs more than my annual salary. The clients just look at him differently. They respect him immediately." Grace turned from the stove, holding a wooden spoon, watching her husband's restless pacing. "Ryan, you do not need a watch to earn respect. Your designs are brilliant. Your hard work speaks for itself." Ryan let out a short, cynical laugh. "In the real world, Grace, image matters. People make judgments in the first 5 seconds. Hard work is fine, but prestige opens doors." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, Grace saw a flick of frustration in his eyes. She was wearing a simple cotton sweater and faded jeans, her dark hair pinned up in a loose clip. "You should buy some new clothes too," Ryan added, his tone lighter, but the undercurrent sharp. "The partners' dinner is next month. Everyone's bringing their wives. Harrison's wife models part-time. I want us to look like we belong." A cold knot formed in Grace's stomach. "Look like we belong where, Ryan?" "In the real world, Grace. The world where people actually succeed," Ryan snapped, before catching himself. He took a breath, softening his voice, and walked over to wrap his arms around her waist. "I am sorry, honey. I am just tired. I am doing all this for us, you know? I want to give us a better life. Do you not want a better life?" Grace rested her forehead against his chest, but the warmth was not there anymore. "I had everything money could buy, Ryan," she thought silently, her chest aching, "and I traded it all for you." "I just want us," Grace whispered softly. "We will be great," Ryan murmured into her hair. Just trust me. But trust, Grace was beginning to learn, was a fragile thing. 6 months later, the architectural firm hired a new senior partner to head the high-net-worth residential sector, a stunning, ambitious woman named Victoria Vance. Victoria was 32, polished, wealthy, and ruthless. She was the daughter of a prominent real estate mogul in Vancouver, and she wore her privilege like armor. She drove an Audi, wore pristine designer suits, and carried herself with the sharp, effortless confidence of someone who had never known a day of financial anxiety. The moment Victoria arrived at the firm, Ryan's focus shifted entirely. He started working late, later than he ever had before. "Victoria and I are working on the St. Clair estate pitch," he would tell Grace over the phone at 8 in the evening, the background hum of an upscale restaurant clearly audible. "She has connections to every major buyer in the city, Grace. If I lock this in, I get made junior partner." Grace would sit at her kitchen table, her cold dinner half-eaten, listening to the enthusiasm in her husband's voice. It was not just enthusiasm for the project. It was an enthusiasm for Victoria's world. One evening, Grace decided to stop by Ryan's office around 7 to bring him a fresh thermos of coffee and a warm jacket, as a heavy autumn rain was pouring outside. She took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The office was mostly dark, save for the glass-walled corner conference room where Ryan and Victoria were sitting side by side over blueprinted layouts. Grace paused in the carpeted hallway, her sneakers silent. Victoria was leaning close to Ryan, her sleek blonde hair almost touching his shoulder as she pointed to a floor plan. Ryan was laughing, a high, eager laugh that Grace had not heard from him in months. "You have talent, Ryan," Victoria was saying, her voice smooth, carrying clearly through the crack in the glass door. "Real talent. But you hold yourself back. You think small because you live small." Ryan's laughter faded, replaced by a tense, quiet attentiveness. "What do you mean?" Victoria turned in her leather chair, placing a manicured hand lightly on Ryan's forearm. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Victoria's fingers rest on her husband's sleeve. "I mean, look at your life," Victoria said softly, her eyes holding Ryan's gaze. "You are living in a modest rental, worrying about monthly bills, taking safe, quiet residential jobs. A man with your ambition needs a partner who opens doors for him, someone who elevates him into the rooms where real power is handled. You cannot soar high when you are anchored to the ground, Ryan." Ryan did not pull his arm away. He sat there, looking at Victoria, a dangerous mixture of longing and vanity flashing across his face. "Grace is a good wife," Ryan murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. It sounded like a defense offered out of habit, not devotion. Victoria smiled, a small, knowing, almost pitying smile. "A good wife for a quiet life, maybe. But is that really all you want? A quiet, average life?" Outside the glass door, Grace stood frozen, the warm thermos heavy in her hands. She waited for Ryan to stand up. She waited for him to say that his wife was his world, that money did not define success, that he loved Grace for who she was. Ryan said nothing. He simply looked down at the blueprints, took a slow breath, and said, "Let us finish the south wing layout." Grace did not open the door. She turned quietly, walked back to the elevators, and rode down to the lobby alone in the silence. The weeks that followed were an agonizing blur for Grace. She watched her husband pull away, inch by agonizing inch. Ryan became distant at home, his mind constantly tethered to his phone. He stopped asking Grace about her day. He stopped kissing her before he left for work. When Grace tried to talk to him about their distance, Ryan turned defensive, blaming his stress on work, on bills, on the relentless pressure to perform. "You do not understand, Grace," Ryan shouted one evening after a minor argument over a credit card bill. "You are content sitting in a quiet office reading books for $50,000 a year. I want more. Is it so wrong for a man to want to build something real?" Grace looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a painful, deep sorrow. "Is this what you think real is, Ryan? Luxury cars and high society approval? It is about status, Grace. It is about being someone," Ryan snapped, grabbing his coat. "Victoria gets it. She understands what it takes to reach the top. You just want me to stay safe and small." He slammed the door behind him, leaving Grace alone in the quiet apartment. That night, Grace did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, her heart breaking into 1,000 quiet pieces. She could have ended it then. She could have picked up her phone, called her father, and had a chauffeur pick her up in a limousine before sunrise. She could have revealed her true identity, shown Ryan that the status he so desperately craved was something she possessed by birthright. But Grace's pride and her deep, stubborn hope held her back. If he only stays with me because he finds out I am wealthy, she reasoned through her tears, then everything we built was a lie. He has to choose me, Grace. Just Grace. 2 months later, the final blow fell. It was a cold Friday afternoon in November. Grace received an unexpected text message from Ryan, asking her to meet him at a quiet cafe near the downtown courts. Not their usual coffee shop, but a stark, modern place with cold stone tables and impersonal lighting. When Grace arrived, Ryan was already sitting in a corner booth. He looked pale, his posture rigid, a white manila envelope sitting flat on the table in front of him. Grace sat down across from him, her heart beating a slow, dread-filled rhythm. "Ryan? What is wrong?" Ryan could not look her in the eyes. He stared down at his hands, his knuckles white. "Grace," he began, his voice flat, stripped of all warmth. "We need to talk about our future." "Okay," Grace said softly, reaching across the table to lay her hand over his. Ryan pulled his hand away quickly, resting it in his lap. The coldness of the gesture was worse than a slap. "I do not think this marriage is working," Ryan said, his words measured, as if he had rehearsed them 100 times in front of a mirror. "We want different things out of life. You are content where you are. I have opportunities opening up for me now. Opportunities that require a different kind of life, a different kind of partnership." Grace felt the air drain from her lungs. A different kind of partnership? Or a different person, Ryan? Ryan finally raised his eyes, but they were cold, distant, guarded. "Victoria and I are entering a new phase. Professionally and personally. She can help me build the firm I have always dreamed of. Her family is backing my new architectural venture." A quiet, painful realization settled over Grace. "You are leaving me for Victoria. For her money, for her connections." "It is not just about money, Grace," Ryan said defensively, his voice rising slightly before he checked himself, leaning in. "It is about alignment. Victoria and I belong in the same world. We have the same drive, the same vision. You and I, we were good for a time, but I have outgrown this life. I have outgrown this life." The words cut through Grace with the precision of a scalpel. She sat there, looking at the man she had loved with every fiber of her being, the man for whom she had given up an empire of absolute luxury, just to live a simple, honest life. And he was tossing her aside because he thought she was too poor, too average, too small for his grand ambitions. "I see," Grace whispered. Her voice did not shake, her tears did not fall. A strange, icy calm descended over her, the quiet, lethal composure of a bachelor. Ryan pushed the white envelope across the table. "These are the divorce papers. My lawyer drew them up. I am leaving you the apartment and the furniture. I will pay off the remaining lease. I do not want to leave you with nothing, Grace. I want to be fair." Grace looked down at the envelope. She did not open it. "You do not have to give me anything, Ryan," Grace said, her voice dropping to a cool, velvety whisper. "Not the apartment. Not a single dollar." Ryan blinked, taken aback by her lack of hysteria, her total absence of tears. "Grace, do not be foolish. You need the support. Your editor's salary barely covers—" "I do not need your money, Ryan," Grace interrupted softly, standing up from the booth. She looked down at him. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with a profound, terrifying pity. "You have no idea what you are throwing away today." Ryan frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Grace, please do not make a dramatic scene." "I will not," Grace said smoothly. "I wish you everything you deserve, Ryan." "Exactly what you deserve." She turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving the envelope sitting cold on the stone table. The divorce was finalized in record time. Grace refused spousal support, refused the apartment, and signed the papers through a court-appointed mediator without ever looking Ryan in the eye again. Ryan moved out immediately, moving into Victoria's sleek, high-rise condominium in the financial district. On the day the final decree was signed at the courthouse, Ryan walked down the wide marble steps into the autumn sunshine. He felt a surge of triumph, a rush of freedom. The legal tie was broken. He was single, ambitious, and standing on the threshold of Victoria's wealthy world. He straightened his designer tie, put on his expensive sunglasses, and walked to his car, convinced he had just made the best decision of his life. That was Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Grace had finished packing her things. She stood in the center of her tiny third-floor apartment, the apartment where she had once danced barefoot in the narrow hallway with Ryan. The room was empty now, save for two neatly stacked leather suitcases resting near the door. Grace walked to the window, looking out at the rain washing over the street. She took a slow, deep breath. The quiet, humble experiment of Grace Miller was over. She had sought pure, unselfish love, and she had watched it crumble under the weight of human greed and petty ambition. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number she had not called in years. The call was answered on the second ring. "Grace?" Her father's deep, powerful voice boomed through the speaker, filled with an immediate, overwhelming warmth. "My darling girl?" "Hi, Dad," Grace whispered, a single, clear tear finally slipping down her cheek. Not for Ryan, but for the loss of her simple dream. "I am ready to come home." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the soft, emotional sigh of a father who had been waiting years for this moment. "I am sending the jet," William Bashlow said immediately, his tone transforming into that of the formidable titan he was. "It will be at Toronto Pearson in 2 hours. Marcus is already in the city with the executive car. Where are you?" "I am at the apartment, Dad," Grace said softly. "I will be waiting downstairs." "Grace," William added gently, "are you all right?" Grace turned her head, looking at her reflection in the rain-streaked window. The softness in her dark eyes had been replaced by something new. Something forged in the fire of betrayal. She looked like her father's daughter now. "I am going to be fine, Dad," Grace said quietly. "In fact, I have never seen things more clearly." It was Friday morning, 3 days after the divorce was finalized. Ryan had slept poorly. A strange, persistent restlessness had hovered over him all night in Victoria's cold, minimalist high-rise penthouse. Victoria had gone to early morning Pilates, leaving Ryan alone with his coffee and a vague, nagging sense of unease. He told himself he was just adjusting. He told himself he was stressed about the upcoming merger of his firm with Vance Development, but deep down, a small, stubborn thought kept circling back to Grace. He remembered her quiet voice in the cafe. "You have no idea what you are throwing away today." Ryan scoffed to himself, setting his coffee cup down on the quartz counter. What had he thrown away? A cramped rental? A life of counting pennies? He was better off. He was moving up. Yet, as he sat there, an unexpected impulse seized him. He wanted to go by Grace's apartment one last time, just to make sure she was okay, just to hand her a check for a few $1,000s, to prove to himself that he was a good guy, a generous ex-husband, a man who had left her in a solid position. 10 minutes later, Ryan was in his car, driving toward Grace's old neighborhood. The morning air was crisp and wet, heavy with the scent of damp leaves. Ryan pulled his sedan up to the curb outside the brick townhouse, where Grace's third-floor apartment was located. He turned off the engine, grabbed his coat, and stepped out onto the rain-slicked pavement. As he reached for the front gate of the townhouse, a sleek, jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled slowly up to the curb, stopping right beside Ryan's car. The vehicle was magnificent, imposing, silent, radiating power. Its windows were tinted dark, blocking any view of the interior. Ryan paused, his hand resting on the iron gate, eyeing the ultra-luxury car with envy. Must be someone rich buying up the historic homes on the block, Ryan thought, feeling that familiar prickle of social ambition. Then, the rear door of the Rolls-Royce swung open. A man stepped out. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, wearing crisp leather gloves and carrying a large black umbrella. He looked like an executive protection officer, built like an oak tree, with sharp, vigilant eyes that scanned the street. The bodyguard opened the umbrella, walked around the side of the car, and opened the rear passenger door, holding the umbrella high to shield the passenger from the light drizzle. Ryan watched, curiosity gripping him. From the dark interior of the Rolls-Royce, a young woman stepped out onto the wet sidewalk. Ryan's heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat, locking in his chest like an iron band. It was Grace. But it was a Grace Ryan had never seen in his entire life. She was not wearing her modest cotton coat or faded jeans. She wore a floor-length, custom-tailored camel wool coat over an exquisite dark silk dress. Her dark hair fell in perfect, glossy waves over her shoulders. On her wrist glinted a diamond bracelet that caught the soft morning light, and her posture was breathtaking, poised, regal, commanding absolute authority. "Grace?" Ryan gasped, the word tearing from his throat, barely louder than a whisper. Grace stopped on the wet pavement. She turned her head slowly, her dark eyes landing on Ryan standing by the rusted iron gate. There was no anger in her face, no pain, no longing. There was only a cold, terrifying stillness. "Grace, what is this?" Ryan stumbled forward, his polished shoes splashing into a puddle, his hands trembling. "What? Whose car is this? What is going on?" Before Grace could answer, a stately, silver-haired man in a magnificent dark overcoat stepped out from the opposite side of the Rolls-Royce. The man walked around to Grace's side, placing a warm, protective hand on her shoulder. Ryan recognized the man instantly from business journals and international news headlines. It was William Bashlow, the billionaire titan of logistics and real estate. One of the richest, most influential men in the country. Ryan stood frozen on the sidewalk, his jaw slack, his mind fracturing under the sudden, impossible weight of reality. "Is this the man, Grace?" William Bashlow asked, his voice a low, thunderous rumble, his icy blue eyes locking onto Ryan with a look of absolute, soul-crushing contempt. Grace looked at Ryan, really looked at him, as if observing a total stranger who had wandered onto her private estate. "He is nobody, Dad," Grace said, her voice smooth, crystalline, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Just someone from my past." William Bashlow gave Ryan a slow, dangerous look. A look that silently promised total, ruthless destruction to Ryan's career, his firm, and every wealthy circle he had ever dreamed of entering. "Let us go home, darling," William said softly to his daughter. "Your mother is waiting at the estate." "Grace, wait!" Ryan yelled, taking a desperate step forward, his mind spinning into chaotic terror. "Grace, what are you talking about? Dad? Who are you? Grace, please talk to me." The tall bodyguard stepped firmly between Ryan and the car, his broad chest forming an impenetrable wall. "Stand back, sir," the guard said, his voice flat and dangerous. Grace did not look back. She gracefully stepped into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. Her father followed, and the bodyguard closed the heavy door with a solid, muffled thud that sounded to Ryan like the closing of a bank vault. The Rolls-Royce glided silently away from the curb, its red taillights cutting through the cool morning mist, disappearing around the corner. Ryan was left standing alone in the rain, soaked to the skin, his hands shaking violently as the terrible, monstrous truth crashed down upon his head. The woman he had discarded as poor, average, and useless was the sole heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire, and as Ryan stood on the wet pavement, staring at the empty street where the car had vanished, his phone began to ring in his pocket. He pulled it out with numb fingers. It was a text from Victoria. "Ryan, my father just called. He is canceling the firm's backing. He says the Bashlow Group just launched a hostile takeover of our parent company. What is going on?" The phone slipped from Ryan's wet hands, crashing onto the pavement below, shattering the screen into 1,000 fractured lines. Ryan covered his face with his hands, letting out a choked, desperate sob into the silent rain. He had thrown away a queen for a speck of dust, and the nightmare was only just beginning. The rain in Toronto did not care that Ryan Collins' world had just fractured into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. It fell steadily, cold and relentless, soaking through his $1,000 suit jacket until the fabric felt as heavy as lead. Ryan remained motionless on the sidewalk outside Grace's old apartment building, staring at the shattered screen of his phone where Victoria's frantic text message was still faintly visible beneath the spiderweb glass. Hostile takeover, Bashlow Group, William Bashlow. The names echoed in his mind like thunder in a hollow canyon. For 3 years, he had believed he was the protector, the provider, the ambitious half of a marriage bound for modest mediocrity. He had looked at Grace's quiet life, her simple cotton sweaters, her willingness to live in a cramped rental while he chased his dreams, and he had pitied her. He had believed he was doing her a favor by setting her free. by leaving her with the furniture and paying off the lease so he could ascend to the world where real power lived. He had not set her free. He had walked off the edge of a cliff, completely blind to the fact that she was the sky holding him up. His phone buzzed violently in his wet palm. The screen flickered, displaying Victoria's caller ID. Ryan swiped the screen with a trembling thumb, pressing the cracked glass to his ear. "Ryan!" Victoria's voice came screeching through the speaker, devoid of its usual smooth, polished calm. She sounded hysterical, her breathing ragged. "Where the hell are you? My father just had a meeting with the board. The Bashlow Group pulled 3 major institutional investors from our residential division in the last 45 minutes. They bought up 22% of our holding company's debt before breakfast." "Victoria?" Ryan's voice was barely an audible whisper. His knees felt weak, his legs like water. "Did you hear what I said?" she screamed over the line. "We are being suffocated. My father is freezing all new project funds, including your architectural unit. The St. Clair Estate project is dead." "Ryan, what did you do?" The press release from Manhattan specifically named our firm as a non-viable partner. "Who did you cross?" Ryan pulled the phone slightly away from his ear, staring blankly ahead at the iron gate of the townhouse. "I did not cross anyone," he wanted to say. "I just threw away William Bashlow's daughter. Ryan, answer me," Victoria demanded, her tone shifting from panic to sharp suspicion. "Why is a New York global conglomerate targeting a mid-sized firm in Toronto? Do you know something about this?" I have to go," Ryan stammered, his throat tight, his vision blurring. "Do not you dare hang up on me," Ryan cut the call. He squeezed his eyes shut, leaning against the cold hood of his sedan, pressing his forehead against the wet metal. He recalled the look in Grace's eyes when she had stepped into that Rolls-Royce. There had been no hatred, no tears. Just that absolute devastating indifference. She had not looked at him like a woman who had been betrayed. She had looked at him like a stain she had finally washed from her clothes. "He is nobody, Dad. Just someone from my past." The words tore through Ryan's chest like a rusted blade. He pushed himself off the car, stumbled into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut, locking out the sound of the rain. He needed to fix this. He had to fix this. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. Grace loved him. She had married him, lived with him, rubbed his shoulders after long workdays, brought him broth when he was tired. A love like that could not just vanish in 3 days. She was just hurt. She was showing him her power to hurt him back because he had broken her heart. Yes, Ryan thought, a desperate, irrational flicker of hope kindling in his panicked brain. She is just angry. She wants me to see what I lost, so I will beg for her back. He turned the key in the ignition, jammed the shifter into drive, and sped away toward the downtown core, his mind spinning a fragile web of illusions to keep from collapsing entirely. 400 miles south, above the dense cloud cover separating Ontario from New York, the private Bashlow Gulfstream jet glided smoothly through the sky. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the storm Ryan was navigating. The interior was finished in muted cream leather, warm walnut paneling, and brushed gold fixtures. Soft ambient lighting illuminated the spacious cabin, where classical piano music played softly from hidden speakers. Grace sat in a plush captain's chair by the window, a cup of hot chamomile tea resting on the mahogany table beside her. She had shed her heavy camel coat, revealing a simple, dark cashmere sweater underneath. She looked out at the sea of white clouds below, her hand resting quietly over her bare left ring finger. The skin there was still faintly indented where Ryan's modest solitaire ring had sat for 3 years. She slowly rubbed the mark with her thumb. William Bashlow sat in the chair opposite her, a crystal glass of sparkling water in his hand. He was 62, with iron gray hair, sharp slate blue eyes, and the broad shoulders of a man who had built an empire through sheer, unyielding force of will. Yet, as he looked at his daughter, his expression held only a profound, gentle warmth. "You do not have to carry any of it, Grace," William said softly, his voice cutting gently through the quiet cabin. "The apartments, the records, the name in Toronto. My legal team will have every trace of Grace Miller erased by the end of the week. To the world, you were simply studying abroad." Grace slowly turned her head from the window to meet her father's eyes. I do not want it erased, Dad, Grace said softly, her voice steady, carrying a newly forged strength. I want to remember every single day of it. William tilted his head, watching her carefully. Why? Because Grace Miller was naive, Grace answered, looking down at her bare hand. She thought love was something you earned by hiding who you were. She thought that if she presented herself as small, quiet, and modest, someone would cherish her just for existing. She paused, taking a slow breath, feeling the quiet fire burning deep within her chest. Grace Miller learned the hard way that when people do not know your true value, they will price you at nothing, she continued, her dark eyes locking onto her father's with an intensity that made the old billionaire smile proudly. Grace Bashlow will not make that mistake again. William set his glass down on the table, leaning forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The takeover of Vance Development's parent holding company was just the first phase. I can crush that boy's firm into dust before the sun sets today, Grace. Just give the word. Grace raised a hand gently, stopping her father. No, she said softly. William raised an eyebrow. No? Destroying him with a hammer is too fast, Dad, Grace replied, her tone cool, analytical, and entirely deliberate. The tone of a true Bashlow. Ryan Collins wanted status. He wanted luxury, prestige, and high society approval. He threw away our marriage because he believed Victoria Vance was his golden ticket into the world of power. She leaned back in her chair, a faint, razor-thin smile touching her lips. Let him try to climb into that world without me, Grace whispered. Let him see how far ambition takes a man when he has no foundation beneath his feet. I do not want him ruined by your hand, Dad. I want him to ruin himself trying to reach the shadow of the life he discarded. William looked at his daughter for a long, quiet moment. Then a proud, booming laugh erupted from his chest, a laugh that echoed through the private jet. God, you really are my daughter, William said, his eyes beaming with affection. Your mother was worried you would come back broken. I told her the Bashlow blood does not break, it just tempers. The plane began its gentle descent toward Taterboro Airport in New Jersey. Below them, through a break in the gray clouds, the glittering, towering skyline of Manhattan began to emerge. A steel and glass forest of absolute wealth and power. Grace looked out at the city she had abandoned 4 years ago. She had left New York as a frightened heiress running away from the gilded cage of her fortune, desperate to prove her worth to a world of strangers. She was returning as the heir apparent to the Bashlow empire, fully aware of who she was, what she possessed, and the heavy price of her lineage. Dad, Grace said as the landing gear locked into place with a heavy thunk. Yes, darling? Call the executive board, Grace said, her voice smooth and unyielding. Tell them I will be taking my seat as Senior Vice President of Global Acquisitions on Monday morning. William smiled, picking up his glass. It is already done, Grace. Welcome home. Back in Toronto, the rainy afternoon had turned into a bleak, freezing evening. Ryan stood in the center of Victoria's ultra-modern, glass-walled penthouse apartment on the 48th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The space was sleek, minimalist, and cold. Polished concrete floors, white leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty city lights below. 3 hours ago, this apartment had felt to Ryan like the ultimate symbol of his success. Now it felt like an arena where he was about to be executed. Victoria Vance was pacing back and forth across the white rug, a glass of Pinot Noir trembling in her hand. Her pristine blonde hair was slightly disheveled, her designer blazer thrown carelessly over the back of a couch. My father just left the board emergency meeting, Victoria said, her voice dangerously tight, her eyes wide with disbelief. It is a bloodbath, Ryan. The Bashlow Group did not just buy our debt. They bought control of our primary lending partners. They have frozen every line of credit attached to Vance Development. Ryan sat on the edge of the sleek sofa, his head buried in his hands. He had not taken off his wet coat. The damp fabric smelled faintly of rain and bitter concrete. They are not stopping there, Victoria continued, her pacing becoming faster, her heels clicking sharp rhythms against the floor. They have offered to acquire our architecture subsidiary for pennies on the dollar, on the explicit condition that the current management team is completely dissolved. She stopped pacing. She slowly turned her head, her sharp blue eyes fixing on Ryan like lasers. "Which brings me back to my first question," Victoria said, her voice dropping to an icy, quiet threat. "Why is William Bashlow, a man worth $40 billion, who has not stepped foot in Toronto in 5 years, personally dismantling my family's business?" Ryan slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, his skin gray under the bright recessed lighting. "Ryan," Victoria snapped, taking a step toward him. "What do you know?" "Grace," Ryan whispered, the name tearing from his chest like a confession. Victoria frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Grace? Your ex-wife? What the hell does your quiet, nobody ex-wife have to do with the Bashlow group?" Ryan swallowed hard, his throat dry as ash. He looked up at Victoria, at the woman he had traded his marriage for, the woman who had promised him prestige and power. "Grace is not Grace Miller," Ryan said, his voice cracking. "She is Grace Bashlow, William Bashlow's only daughter." The penthouse went dead quiet. The sound of the rain against the 48th floor glass was the only noise left in the universe. Victoria stood frozen on the white rug, her wine glass suspended midair. She stared at Ryan as if he had suddenly started speaking an ancient, forgotten language. What did you just say?" Victoria breathed. "I saw them today," Ryan sobbed, burying his face back in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Outside her apartment, she was getting into a Rolls-Royce. William Bashlow was with her. He looked at me, Victoria. He looked at me like I was dirt." Victoria's hand slowly lowered. The wine in her glass sloshed against the rim. "Grace Miller is a Bashlow?" Victoria whispered, her mind racing, connecting the dots of financial devastation that had struck her family's empire in less than 12 hours. Suddenly, the confusion on Victoria's face transformed into an expression of raw, terrifying rage. "You idiot!" Victoria gasped, her voice trembling with a fury so pure it sent a chill down Ryan's spine. "You absolute, utter idiot!" "Victoria, please," Ryan began, starting to stand up. "Do not you dare stand up!" Victoria screamed, throwing her wine glass violently against the concrete wall. The glass shattered into 100 sharp fragments, dark red wine splashing like blood across the pristine white surface. "You told me she was a nobody!" Victoria shrieked, advancing on him, her fingernails dug into her palms. "You told me she was an average, low-level editor with no connections. You told me she was holding you back." "I did not know," Ryan cried out defensively, tears streaming down his face. "She never told me. She lived in a third-floor rental. She rode the streetcar. She bought groceries on sale. How was I supposed to know she was a billionaire's daughter? Because she was testing you, you fool," Victoria yelled, her face inches from his, her eyes burning with hatred. "She wanted to see if you loved her for who she was. And you proved to her, and to her father, that you were a pathetic, greedy opportunist who could be lured away by the first woman with a nice car and a recognizable last name." Ryan flinched as if she had struck him. The harsh, cruel truth of Victoria's words stripped away the last remaining layers of his ego. Victoria did not love him. She had never loved him. She had seen him as a talented, ambitious pet, an architect she could mold and use to elevate her own prestige. And now that he had brought the wrath of a multi-billion-dollar empire down upon her family, he was worse than useless to her. He was poison. "Get out," Victoria said, her voice suddenly dropping to a deadly flat whisper. Ryan blinked, stunned. "Victoria, please. We can figure this out. I can talk to Grace." "Get out of my apartment, Ryan," Victoria commanded, pointing a manicured finger toward the heavy double doors of the entrance. "My father's lawyers are filing an injunction against you tonight. You are fired from the firm. Your name is being removed from every client account. If you ever step foot in Vance Development again, security will throw you into the street." "Victoria, you cannot do this," Ryan pleaded, reaching out for her arm. "I gave up my marriage for you. I ruined my life for this firm." Victoria pulled her arm away with absolute disgust, looking down at him as if he were a cockroach on her expensive rug. "You did not ruin your life for me, Ryan," Victoria said, her words slicing through him with absolute coldness. "You ruined your life because you were blind, arrogant, and greedy. Now get your clothes and get out of my sight." 3 weeks later, Manhattan. The headquarters of the Bashlow Group occupied the top 20 floors of a striking glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of Midtown. From the executive suite on the 60th floor, the city below looked like a vast grid of yellow taxicabs, miniature parks, and distant rivers. Grace stood behind a massive desk of polished dark oak, reviewing a stack of quarterly acquisition reports. She was transformed. The soft, hesitant woman who had edited manuscripts in Toronto was gone, replaced by a vision of quiet, commanding elegance. She wore a tailored dark navy suit from Armani, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek, low bun. Her makeup was minimal yet flawless, highlighting the sharp, refined angles of her face and the cool, intelligent clarity of her dark eyes. A soft chime sounded on her desk intercom. Grace pressed the button. "Yes, Sarah?" Miss Bashlow, her executive assistant's voice spoke smoothly through the speaker. "The delegation from the European Real Estate Consortium has arrived for the 2 o'clock briefing, and there is a gentleman waiting in the lower lobby." Grace did not look up from her report. "Does he have an appointment?" "No, Miss Bashlow," Sarah replied hesitantly. "He has been downstairs since 7 in the morning. Security has asked him to leave 3 times, but he refuses. He says he is your husband." Grace's pen paused over the paper. A slight, imperceptible tilt of her head was the only reaction she showed. "His name?" Grace asked smoothly. "Ryan Collins, ma'am. He looks quite distressed, Miss Bashlow. Security is ready to have him removed by the police department, but he insists that if you just see him for 5 minutes, you will understand." Grace leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. She felt no surge of panic, no quickening of her pulse, just a cold, logical assessment of a problem that needed to be neatly concluded. "Tell security to bring him up," Grace said calmly into the intercom. "Ma'am?" Sarah sounded surprised. "To the executive floor?" "To the East Conference Room," Grace specified. "Give him 5 minutes. And Sarah?" "Yes, Miss Bashlow? Have 2 floor security officers stand outside the door. I would not want him making a scene in front of the European delegation." "Right away, Miss Bashlow." 10 minutes later, Grace walked down the quiet, carpeted corridor of the executive floor. Her high heels clicked with rhythmic, icy precision against the marble tile border. She reached the heavy double-glass doors of the East Conference Room. Through the glass, she could see Ryan sitting at the far end of a 30-foot conference table. He looked broken. His suit was rumpled, his shirt collar unbuttoned, his tie loose. His dark hair was messy, and dark circles shadowed his hollow, sunken eyes. He had lost weight over the past 3 weeks. His cheeks were drawn, his posture stooped as if carrying an unbearable weight. Grace opened the door and stepped inside. The door clicked shut softly behind her. Ryan jumped up from his chair so fast it almost overturned onto the floor. "Grace!" he gasped, his voice raspy, filled with a desperate, frantic emotion. He moved quickly around the long table, taking large steps toward her. "Grace! Oh, God! Grace!" "Stay right there, Ryan," Grace said smoothly, raising one gloved hand slightly. Her voice was not loud, it was not angry, but the absolute authority in her tone froze Ryan in his tracks, 10 feet away from her. He stood there, staring at her, his hands trembling, tears welling up in his bloodshot eyes. "Grace!" Ryan choked out, swallowing hard. "Look at you! I did not believe it. Even after I saw you in Toronto, I thought I was dreaming. I thought it was some kind of nightmare." Grace stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her face an unreadable mask of absolute poise. "Why are you here, Ryan?" Grace asked quietly. "Why am I here?" Ryan repeated, a manic laugh escaping his lips before turning into a desperate sob. "Grace, my life is completely destroyed. Victoria dumped me. Her father fired me. My architectural license is being reviewed by the board because Vance Development pulled all their project filings. I do not have a job. I lost my apartment. I am sleeping in a cheap hotel near the airport." He took a half step closer, holding out his hands in a pleading, desperate gesture. "Grace, please," Ryan wept, tears running freely down his hollow cheeks. "I know I made a mistake, a horrible, terrible mistake. I was stupid. I was seduced by the idea of wealth and success. I lost my mind, Grace, but I love you. I have always loved you. The 3 years we had together in Toronto, that was real. You know it was real. Grace watched him weep. She looked at the tears streaming down his face, heard the desperate, ragged terror in his voice, and waited to feel something. She waited for the old ache in her heart, the urge to comfort him, the warmth that used to fill her chest when he held her in their tiny apartment. There was nothing, only a vast, quiet void. "You did not love me, Ryan," Grace said softly, her voice carrying the quiet truth of absolute clarity. "You loved the idea of a devoted woman who made your humble life comfortable while you looked over her shoulder for something better." "No, that is not true," Ryan shouted desperately. "I loved you, Grace. The girl in the cotton sweater. The girl who edited books. The girl who cooked pasta with me." "That girl did not exist, Ryan," Grace replied, her dark eyes holding his gaze without flinching. Grace Miller was a test, a simple, honest test to see if a man could look at me without dollar signs in his eyes, to see if someone could love me for my heart, my mind, and my soul. She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "And you failed that test, Ryan," Grace whispered. "Not because you could not afford a big house or a luxury watch. You failed because the moment another woman offered you a shortcut to power, you stepped on my heart to reach it." "I was wrong." Ryan fell to his knees on the plush carpet, reaching out to grab the hem of her trousers, but Grace smoothly stepped back out of his reach. Ryan pressed his forehead against the carpet, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was wrong, Grace. Please, give me a second chance. I will do anything. I will work anywhere. I do not care about the money. I do not care about the status. Just give me back my wife." Grace looked down at the man groveling on the carpet of her executive conference room. "My father offered to ruin you, Ryan," Grace said quietly. "He wanted to crush your firm, revoke your credentials, and make sure you never worked in architecture again." Ryan looked up from the floor, his eyes wide with horror and desperate hope. And you stopped him?" "I did," Grace said. A wave of intense relief washed over Ryan's face. "Grace." "Oh God, thank you, thank you. I stopped him," Grace interrupted, her voice dropping to a cool, lethal whisper, "because I realized you do not need my father to ruin you, Ryan. You have already done it yourself." Ryan's relief shattered, instantly replaced by a fresh wave of terror. "You traded a woman who owned billions for a woman who owned a few millions," Grace continued, her tone completely even. "You traded a woman who owned billions for temporary corporate clout. You ruined your own name, your own career, and your own soul. All because you were too blind to see the treasure standing right in front of you." She turned toward the glass doors of the conference room. "Grace, please!" Ryan screamed, scrambling to his feet, trying to rush after her. The heavy glass doors swung open instantly. 2 broad-shouldered Bashlow security officers stepped smoothly into the room, blocking Ryan's path, grabbing him firmly by the arms. "Let go of me!" Ryan struggled violently, shouting over the officers' shoulders as Grace walked calmly into the bright hallway. "Grace, look at me! Grace, I love you! Please do not do this!" "Grace." Grace walked down the polished corridor without turning around once. She reached her executive office, stepped inside, and closed the mahogany door, shutting out the desperate screams echoing from the hallway. She walked over to her desk, sat down in her leather chair, and picked up her pen. She looked at the stack of acquisition reports waiting for her review. Her hand was completely steady. Her breathing was calm. The indention on her ring finger was gone, replaced by the cool, reassuring weight of her family's legacy ring, a flawless dark sapphire surrounded by white diamonds. Her phone chimed. Grace answered. "Yes, Sarah. Miss Bashlow. The European delegation is ready in the main boardroom," Sarah reported, "and security has escorted Mr. Collins off the premises." "Thank you, Sarah," Grace said smoothly. "Inform the delegation I will be there in 2 minutes." "Yes, ma'am." Grace hung up the phone. She stood up, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, and looked down at the vast, bustling expanse of New York City below. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, reflecting brightly off the towers of glass and steel. Grace took a slow, deep breath, feeling the quiet, magnificent power of her own heart, unbroken, untamed, and entirely her own. She had sought genuine love in the quiet shadows of obscurity, only to find that true strength was born when she embraced the light of who she was always meant to be. Grace turned away from the window, smoothed her dark navy jacket, and walked out to lead her empire. Ryan Collins learned the hardest lesson of his life. When you trade genuine devotion for shallow ambition, you end up with nothing at all. And Grace? She did not just survive her heartbreak, she reclaimed her throne. What an incredible journey. If Grace's story touched your heart, please give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button with notifications turned on, so you never miss our next emotional story. Now, I would love to hear from you. Do you think Grace was right to walk away from Ryan completely without giving him a second chance? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, take care of your hearts, and we will see you in the next story.